Born Free is a 1966 film starring the real-life couple Virginia McKenna and Bill Travers, who played as Joy and George Adamson. George and Joy Adamson were the real-life couple who raised Elsa the lioness, an orphan lion cub, to adulthood and released her into the wilderness of Kenya. The film was directed by James Hill and it had won numerous awards. The making of the film was a life-changing experience for actors Virginia McKenna and her husband Bill Travers, who became animal rights activists and were instrumental in creating the Born Free Foundation. In the northern province of Kenya, British game warden George Adamson was forced to kill a man-eating lion and his lioness. He realized too late that the lioness was charging him in defense of her 3 cubs. George, who realized that the 3 cubs are now orphans, brought them home and he and his wife Joy decided to raise them. They named the cubs as Big One, Lustica and Elsa. When the cubs became too old, Big One and Lustica were sent off to Rotterdam Zoo. George and Joy chose to keep Elsa, having become especially attached to her. Years later, George's boss, John Kendall, informed him that a lion in Kiunga had been killing goats in a local village. George was sent to kill the lion. George killed the lion successfully, allowing him and Joy to enjoy a holiday with Elsa near the Indian Ocean. When they returned to the northern province, the Adamsons came to know that Elsa has caused a massive elephant stampede. George's boss John Kendall said that they could no longer keep Elsa and must leave her in a zoo. However, George's wife Joy insisted that Elsa must be let free in the wild, believing a zoo would make her miserable. John reluctantly agreed to give the Adamson 3 months to do so. The Adamsons brought Elsa to the Meru National Park to begin her rehabilitation. They started off by trying to introduce her to a wild lion along with a kill. This didn't work as planned and they could only Elsa all alone when they returned next day. Elsa continually failed to make a kill, and attacked by a warthog during one attempt. Eventually, the Adamsons decided to leave Elsa for a week in the bush to encourage her to become more independent. However, they found her severely injured, possibly by wild lions. George now believed that Elsa cannot survive, so must be sent to a zoo, but his wife Joy opposed, and reiterated that Elsa should have her freedom. This proved to be a good decision because Elsa eventually left for days at a time, made several kills by herself. When she came into season, she was taken out for her final test of joining a wild pride. Elsa was attacked initially, but she was accepted into a pride much to the relief and excitement of Joy and George. Adamsons returned to Kenya after a year and they were delighted to discover that Elsa had thrived as a wild lion and she was also the mother to 3 cubs. The Adamsons named the cubs as Jespa, male, Gopa, male, and Little Elsa, female. Joy and George decide to let the cubs remain wild instead of hand-rearing them as they did with Elsa and her sisters. Elsa died after a year due to a tick-borne blood disease similar to malaria, which often infects the cat family. Elsa's grave is in the Meru National Park. Elsa's cubs were a little over 1 year old when she died and the Adamsons knew they were still too young to be able to hunt for themselves. Hence, they continued to provide goats for the cubs. However, the cubs disappeared for several weeks and were found to have been attacking goats belonging to local tribesmen. The cub Jespa was hit by an arrow in one such raid, which fortunately was not tipped with poison. Adamsons knew the cubs had to be relocated somewhere to save them from being killed in the wild. They were given permission to move the cubs to the Serengeti National Park. The Adamsons were initially allowed to continue to camp close to the release point to monitor the cubs and continue to provide them with food and help them until they could reliably hunt for themselves. However, after a while the park authorities decided it was time to leave the cubs to fend for themselves because of their concerns about the safety of tourists to the park.
Adamsons were told to leave.
The Adamsons knew the cubs would most likely starve and needed more time to develop their hunting skills. However, the park authorities would not grant permission. Joy Adamson then decided to pay for them to be allowed to stay on as regular park tourists, but they had to stay at the designated tourist accommodation. They had to drive out each day to find the cubs, which was becoming ever more difficult. They finally managed to find the cubs after many days of searching, and they spent the next few days with them. Jespa still had the arrowhead in his side, and the Adamsons made plans to bring along a vet and make another attempt to remove it. However, when they returned they could not find the cubs, and it proved to be the last time they ever saw the cubs together. George Adamson was able to find little Elsa, healthy and in the company of 2 other unrelated lions, during 19 months of subsequent searching, and this was the last time that the Adamsons saw any of Elsa's cubs. The film Born Free received exceptional response when it was released, and it also received several awards. The film was based on the book Born Free in 1960 by Joy Adamson. The story of Lioness Elsa was so popular all over the world, and there were many works on her emotional bond with Adamson family. The book Born Free, 1960, was followed by 2 other books, Living Free, 1961, and Forever Free, 1963. A film sequel titled Living Free was directed by Jack Kuffer and released in 1972. While deriving its name from the second book, the film was based on the 3rd book in the series. It starred Susan Hampshire and Nigel Davenport as Joy and George Adamson, although the film was not as well received as its predecessor. A documentary follow-up to Born Free, titled The Lions Are Free, was directed by James Hill and Bill Travers and released in 1969. The film follows Born Free actor Bill Travers as he journeys to a remote area in Kenya to visit George Adamson and several of Adamson's lion friends. In 1974, a 13-episode American television series was broadcast by NBC, titled Born Free, starring Diana Muldaur and Gary Collins as Joy and George Adamson. The series was later followed by the 1996 television film Born Free, a new adventure directed by Tommy Lee Wallace and starring Linda Pearl and Chris Knopf. Joy and George Adamson do not appear as the main characters in the story. It spawned a TV series in 1998, but none of the episodes aired in the US. George Adamson's life is seen through the eyes of his assistant, Tony Fitzjohn. George is portrayed by Richard Harris, and Honor Blackman makes a brief appearance as Joy. On September 28, 2010, BBC4 ran a number of programs to mark the 50th anniversary of the publishing of the book, Born Free. These included a new 1-hour documentary entitled The Born Free Legacy. It explores the story behind the book Born Free about the lives of Joy and George Adamson with the orphan lion cub Elsa. It then looks at the huge impact the book and the subsequent 1966 movie had on the growing wildlife conservation movement. It includes archive footage and clips of interviews with the Adamsons, as well as various contributions from people including Virginia McKenna, Tony Fitzjohn, George Adamson's longtime assistant, and Sir David Attenborough. On February 1, 2011, the long-running BBC series Natural World broadcast episode 10 of Series 29, which was entitled Elsa, the Lioness That Changed the World. This episode, narrated by actor Richard Armitage, looked back at Elsa's life and legacy, and the work done by George Adamson to rehabilitate lions into the wild following the making of the Born Free film. A slightly shortened version of this episode, this time narrated by the conservationist Chris Morgan, under the title Elsa's Legacy. The Born Free story was also shown as part of the Nature TV series, released on PBS stations in January 2011.